On Tuesday, March 4th, Common Sense Institute hosted our quarterly Eggs in the Economy event. This edition was titled Over Easy or Overpriced, the Growing Cost of Living in Colorado. Our panelists included CSI Coors Economic Mobility Fellow Tamra Ryan, President and CEO of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association, Lynn Granger, CSI Free Enterprise Fellow Ross Kaminsky, and Moderator Vince Bzdek, Editor-in-Chief of the Colorado Springs Gazette. Our Executive Director, Kelly Caulfield, kicks off the event and welcomes you. Please enjoy Over Easy or Overpriced, the Growing Cost of Living in Colorado.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our program this morning. My name's Kelly Caulfield, and I'm the Executive Director of the Common Sense Institute. Common Sense Institute, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to the protection and the promotion of the Colorado economy. CSI actually turns 15 this year, so we're still a pretty new organization, but we're really proud of that anniversary. And I see a lot of new faces in the audience, which makes me so excited. For those who don't know, Common Sense is spreading across the country. I love saying that because there's not just a Common Sense Colorado. We have expanded to 3 other states. There is a Common Sense Arizona, a Common Sense Oregon, and a Common Sense Iowa. So we are a family of 4 with ambitions to continue to grow. We are a nonprofit. We are 501c3. We are nonpartisan. We rely on supporters like you so that we can continue to do impactful research relevant to the Colorado economy. And for those who haven't joined this before, this is our quarterly programming. We call it Eggs in the Economy. It's our quarterly gathering to learn from our policy fellows and to learn from policymakers at the state and local level about the issues most important to all of us here. We believe strongly here at the Common Sense Institute that there is a need for civility, open dialogue, and a conversation driven by the facts, not emotions. That's our whole mission, focus on data and the facts. We believe that sound fiscal and economic research is essential to uphold Colorado's economic vitality, future, and individual opportunity. And never before has this role been more important to focus on what matters. I do want to take a moment to recognize a few people. I have seen many of you here, and I'm so thrilled. Could you please stand if you're an elected official so that we can recognize you today? I'd also like to introduce the board of directors for the central office of Common Sense Institute and Colorado. Can you please stand if you're a board member? I've seen many of you today. Thank you for supporting us. I also wanted to take a moment to celebrate 2 of our board members who were recently inducted into the Colorado Business Hall of Fame, Charlie McNeil and Earl Wright. We were excited for them. Thank you. It's quite the honor. And then we also, Robin Weiss is our vice chairman and the president of Rocky Mountain Junior Achievement. Her entire neighborhood lost power, so I don't believe Robin's here today. But she is the Villager 2024 Woman of the Year, so we're proud of that as well. Thank you. Our organization is able to execute on 90 pieces of research a year, mainly because of an amazing set of policy fellows. And I am thrilled to share that today there's 2 new fellows that I want to recognize. One is on our panel. Many of you all know. We are thrilled that Ross Kaminsky is our 2025 Mike A. Loprino Free Enterprise Fellow. Much gratitude to the Loprino family for sponsoring and supporting this fellowship. It is one of the most important fellowships that Common Sense has each year. And for those who don't know, Ross Kaminsky hosts the Ross Kaminsky Show. It comes on right after this, so we are thrilled that Ross was able to join us today, weekdays from 9 a.m. to noon, with an approach based on common sense and a respect for America's founding documents, Ross aims to be a nonpartisan champion of limited government, good policy, and individual liberty. So please give him a round of applause. We are thrilled he's here today. I'd also like to announce a returning fellow is back with Common Sense, Ben Stein. I would like Ben to stand up for a moment. He has had a tremendous career. Everyone knows Ben in the transportation sector. He was CDOT's chief financial officer. Those are always the smartest people inside of the agency, leading a number of major transportation projects that have made Colorado a better place to work, live, and play. Thank you, Ben, for being our fellow. Lots of good staff and fellow announcements. I am thrilled to share that we will have a new director of research joining the Common Sense Institute here in Colorado starting Monday. Dr. Caitlin McKinney is a PhD economist and has over 8 years of experience working for the state of Colorado. She's been an economist within the state demography office, DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, the Colorado Workforce Development Council, as well as the Department of Labor and Employment, and the State Planning and Budgeting Office. So a real expert in state policy and budget. She has a master's in applied economics from University of Colorado, a master's degree in mineral and energy economics from the School of Mines, and a PhD in economics. So we are thrilled to have Caitlin join us on Monday. She was unable to be here, but we are so thrilled that we are growing. I also wanted to announce 2 new members of the Common Sense Central Office. They work across all 4 states and are wonderful supports to us in Colorado, plus the other states. I think many of you all know Alyssa Zambrano. She's here today. Could you stand, Alyssa? Are you in the room? Oh, might still be downstairs, greeting guests. So she's our Vice President of Operations. And then Dr. Thomas Young is another senior economist who has joined Common Sense. I now want to turn to today's program. We are here to talk about a topic that I think is really top of mind for all of us. Everyone is talking about why no one can get ahead. Why are we always feeling like we are getting behind? Colorado has the 14th highest cost of living compared to all other states. And we are seeing that in a number of facets of life: fees, restaurants, childcare, utilities, housing. Colorado ranks 50th in housing when we're compared to the other states in terms of affordability. This is for renters and buyers. The Home Buyers Misery Index increased in all counties, every single one of them, last year in 2023, as mortgage rates increased and housing prices still remained out of reach for most Coloradans. Last fall, the Common Sense Institute put out the Inflation Misery Index. Sorry to be negative, but we have to focus on data, and we are trying to provide a way for everyday Coloradans to talk about the pain that they may be experiencing. In 2023, we found that the average household in Colorado must spend $26,000 more per household just to consume at the 2019 levels. This means that the average household has effectively lost 21% of their income to inflation. Denver metro households are still dealing with increased household costs, according to Common Sense Institute's latest inflation report, particularly in the areas of medical care and transportation costs. Our transportation costs are quadrupled the size of the national average, which is an interesting trend that we want to continue to monitor. The state's growing reliance on fees also impacts our cost of living. The state has seen a 3,000, that's not a typo, so for our next slide, 3,000% increase in fees since 1996. The share of state spending that is exempt from Tabor has almost doubled since 1996. This matters because it drives Coloradans' effective tax burdens higher and higher without giving voters a say in the process. And it's increasing truly our effective rate of taxation far beyond the levels that voters would decide for themselves. I want to turn to energy real quick. We'll have the real expert up here shortly with Lynn Granger on the panel. But we were very proud of a report that Common Sense Institute did in January with our energy fellow, Tricia Curtis. CSI issued a report because we wanted to better understand how much are we all going to pay to meet the current greenhouse gas roadmap reduction targets set out by our state. The state did a very good report showing what the cost would be on the utility side, but we never saw what's the cost to us, and we really feel like that's our sweet spot. That's where we're trying to shine a light for voters. We were able to see that in order to meet our 2040 electricity goals, that the electricity prices are projected to grow at more than 3 times the rate of inflation and nearly 13 times the rate of historical growth seen from the period of 2010 to 2020. So to break it down by household and on the business side, this is what we will all pay in order, at least. We think our estimates are conservative. This is how much we will all be asked to pay to meet the roadmap. It's a significant amount of money for businesses and households. And while these energy costs are going up for commercial building owners and industrial business operators, they are serving fewer and fewer people. Downtown Denver still has not reached its pre-pandemic levels. And that's why a topic that was important for us to study that just came out, last week, which was a busy week for us, we wanted to quantify what would be the benefits if more government employees were returning to more of an in-work setting. What would that mean to the local economy? And this matters because Colorado's public sector workforce hit 500,000 for the first time in our latest jobs report. There are 500,000 local, state, and federal public workers here in Colorado. That's a large amount. As you can see, if the telework remote federal employees return to work in the Denver area federal buildings, it would create 12,000 jobs and increase GDP by $2 billion. If state employees return to work, it would create another $2 billion. And if our local government employees, again, across the state, if every single one returned to in-person work, that would be an additional $3 billion. So collectively, we're looking at a $7 billion increase in GDP if we had more of a return to work. And we have estimates for the private sector as well, but this report did focus a little bit more on the public sector and what that impact would be. And for many in the room, this would be very beneficial to commercial vacancies. Our data shows that the commercial office vacancy would fall by 20% if we had more of our public workers back in the office. So I wanted to provide this data to help set our breakfast table as we turn to our panel, and I'm going to introduce all 4 of them. They are going to each talk about how their research, how their work is also impacting the cost of living here in Colorado. Before I bring them up, though, I do want to make a quick announcement for the Q&A, which we hope we have about 2 or 3 questions at the end for Q&A. You'll see these colored note cards on your table. If you have a burning question, please write it on that note card and then pass it to your right. And Cole Anderson on our team will collect them and pick a few to be asked at the end of the program. I'm now going to invite our 3 panelists and our moderator to the stage while I introduce them. Vince Bzdek is the executive editor of the Denver Gazette and the Colorado Springs Gazette. He also formerly worked for the Washington Post and the Denver Post. He is a fan favorite around here. He's a great moderator. Thanks for being here, Vince.
Thank you.
We also have Lynn Granger, who is the president and CEO of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. Prior to joining COGA, as many people refer to them, Lynn served as a regional director at the American Petroleum Institute and was the executive director of API Colorado. Tamra Ryan is the CEO of the Women's Bean Project, a social enterprise providing transitional employment in its food manufacturing business to women who are trying to escape from chronic poverty and unemployment. She serves as the Coors Economic Mobility Fellow here at the Common Sense Institute, and she just released her second book in January. It is called Fellowship, 16 Lessons to Become a Leader Worth Following. I've learned a lot from Tamra, and I highly recommend her book. I've already introduced Ross, and I'm going to kick it over to you, Vince, to take it away. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for being here. I hope you had enough coffee. Appreciate you coming out so early. It's interesting. Cost of living just hit me in the last couple weeks. I got a homeowner's insurance bill that was triple my regular bill. Some of you probably experienced this. So I called around a bit to see if I had some alternatives. And 2 people told me, you know, Vince, I'm not going to insure you because your house is going to burn down within 5 years. So it's really not worth this to us. So this is real for all of us. I think you guys all have a story to tell about how this is impacting different segments. Ross, I want to break you in right away since you're brand new here. So let's start off with you. I just saw CSI just released a great study last week on the impact of the Denver Mayor Johnson's proposed 20% service fee to be added to your restaurant bill. So what did CSI find in that report, and what are your feelings about it? I think you might have some strong feelings about this.
I am president of the Bad Analogy Club, so let me just start with that, and we'll get to some data. So my thought on this is, the guy goes to the doctor's office, and every 29 seconds he's hitting himself in the head, and he says to the doctor, I have a terrible headache. I don't know why. It won't go away. And the doctor, instead of saying, well, stop hitting yourself in the head, says, here, take this hammer, and every 43 seconds start hitting yourself on the foot, and you'll forget about your headache in a little while. Right? And I don't understand how somebody who's so nominally smart as Mike Johnston could come up with an idea this bad. But CSI did some research in a hurry on this, and they did a couple of scenarios. So if you missed it, Mike Johnston is proposing a 20% surcharge at what he calls above the line on restaurant bills in Denver. So whatever all the food adds up to, another 20%. And the above the line part is important because he wants that 20% to itself be taxable. And then he's got some odd Rube Goldberg idea about redistributing the 20% back to the restaurant. It's just so. CSI did some interesting research. One was a scenario where the 20% gets added, and then customers are still willing to tip based on the whole bill. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one. The negative numbers are very dramatic. I think the more realistic scenario, which CSI also did, was where much of that 20% service fee would be offset by a reduction in willingness to tip.
Right.
People will say, well, this is the tip, or mostly this is the tip. And so what CSI found is that would kill about a little over 1,100 jobs in the restaurant business in Denver. It would cut the Denver metro area's GDP by about $175 million. And a total drop of sales of over 300 million. And I think that's a very realistic to maybe slightly optimistic scenario. It's a shockingly bad idea, especially considering he identified the problem correctly as costs being driven too high for the industry. One more quick anecdotal thing. A friend of mine named Alex Seidel is a James Beard Award-winning chef. He just shut down one of the best restaurants in Denver called Fruition. After 18 years, I went to their next to last night in business, and I sent him this thing, and he said, actually, I tried that, and it was a massive failure. It drove down the number of customers and caused confusion and anger among customers and employees alike. So I don't know that Johnston actually talked to anybody who knows anything.
It was more of a trial balloon, you think?
A dumb trial balloon.
A dumb trial balloon.
And I'll just add, you're going to pay more for food that's not as good because natural gas stoves are going to be banned also in Colorado. So.
Double whammy.
Yeah.
Tamra, let's go to you. There's this bill now being debated that would make it easier for unions to organize in Colorado by canceling the second election that businesses, workers would have to vote in to give it final approval. You did a study on how changes to the Labor Peace Act could impact the cost of living. Can you explain why this issue matters, and what you found?
Yeah, first let me back up for a moment and just explain for those not familiar. In Colorado, well, across the country, every state has the right to organize. That is legislated federally. What is different between states is that some states explicitly say you can't form collective bargaining agreements, union shop agreements, and compel people to join unions. And other states say that you can. Colorado, we're weird in a lot of ways. One of the ways we're unusual is that we have the Labor Peace Act, which requires 2 votes in order to create a union shop agreement, collective bargaining. The second vote requires a 75% majority vote. And when that happens, when collective bargaining comes in place, then every employee is compelled to pay union dues. In some places, compelled to join the union or be fired. And so what Senate Bill 5 proposes is that we get rid of that second vote, which effectively would make Colorado what is called a right to organize state. I don't like the terminology right to organize and right to work because they're misnomers, but that's what would happen. So in our study, what we did was we just looked at what does the economy look like in states where there is collective bargaining agreements or union shop agreements. And what we saw is that the cost of living in all of those states is higher. And also wages are higher for those employees. But the higher wage is mitigated by the fact that cost of living is higher and you have to pay union dues, which, there is a huge range for union dues, but it's about an average of 2% of your wages that you pay. So when we think about Colorado in our current situation, we know we're the 14th highest cost of living, even though we're not a right to organize state, technically. And we also know that we've recently increased minimum wage pretty dramatically. And we've also tied minimum wage to inflation. So not just across the state, but in certain municipalities, Denver included, we've actually increased minimum wage even higher. Currently, Denver minimum wage is $18.81 an hour. And increases are tied to inflation. And so our concern is a couple of things. One is that if it becomes easier to create union shop agreements, it may drive up wages, but it might not because we're already so high. And I remember when we were voting on the amendment to increase minimum wage, and I remember so many employers being interviewed and saying, well, I don't pay minimum wage, so it doesn't really affect me. Well, now that minimum wage in Denver is $18.81 an hour, across the state it's over $14 an hour, I would imagine that a lot of employers are paying that and also paying higher for those middle ranges. Because when you increase the bottom, you put pressure on the middle and on up. And so what we are concerned about is we'll increase cost of living, we'll increase inflation, and we really may not have the benefit that we think we might have. We're already, Colorado's wages and benefits are already higher than the national average. Our average wages across the state are over $39 an hour. Average benefits are equivalent of over $15 an hour, as compared to an average across the U.S. of $32 an hour and I think $14 an hour. So I think that what is believed to be the benefit of making this change, I'm not sure that we'll see. And if we do see it, we're going to see a lot of pain in a lot of other ways.
So what's driving this legislation, do you think? What's the motivation behind it? Frankly, I think we kicked the can down the road in terms of increasing minimum wage for so long that now we're in catch-up mode. And this is happening across the country. Right. And so I think it's a belief in this is about workers' rights. This is about social justice. And so I think that's a big part of it. But what I think it's lost when we think about that is, we don't tend to think of things as systems. We tend to move one lever and then perhaps not even wait until that moving that lever rolls out and the system recalibrates.
And so I think it's a combination of things, and I believe that we're trying to make a lot of change in a short amount of time that without allowing the system to settle.
Got it.
Vince, can I just add
Please.
one quick thing? I'll be a little bit less polite. I think the main thing driving this is that labor unions want to force more people into the labor unions so they can collect more dues, so they can make more political contributions to the folks who they think will pass more laws like this to benefit labor unions.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, let's talk about, Lynn, let's go over to you. Thanks for summarizing that so succinctly. Lynn, let's talk about the cost of energy, which is, I think, impacting all of us. We were just talking about a conversation I had with the head of utilities in Colorado Springs, who says we cannot make these goals for 2030, these emission goals. We just can't do it. We need some different timelines. We need some alternatives. It's going to be too costly to our ratepayers, and we need to pause. So let's talk about that move to renewals, which is a huge, huge thing going on right now in Colorado. And a lot of utilities departments are trying to do this, trying to do it well. But tell me about the costs and sort of some of the inherent troubles we're encountering as we try to make this huge change.
Sure. So one, I'm very pleased that that utility had a reasonable conversation with you about not being able to reach those goals. I think what we've seen, over the past 5-10 years is a real inability as a state, as a nation, as a world to have a reasonable conversation about what our energy future looks like. Anybody know the last real energy source that we transitioned away from completely? Any guesses? Whale oil. As a world is the last true energy source that we actually transitioned away from. So this discussion about a transition is very frustrating. I like to call it an addition, right? We are adding energy sources, and we will need all of the above to supply the energy in the future that we all need and use, but it can't be a none of the below. As a world, we have used more coal in the last couple years than we have in our history, and we are on track in 2025 to surpass that again, largely due to the coal plants that China and India are bringing online. So this idea of this transition or this discussion about, getting away from natural gas is just not feasible, it's not reasonable, and I think that at the end of the day is what's really driving up consumer costs, because our inability to have a public, reasonable conversation about it is making people think that we can get there sooner than we can, or that we can get there at all. And so it's very refreshing to hear utilities, there's a lot of closed-door conversations about what is realistic, but they really need to have more public conversations about some of these goals, the inability to reach them, and what it's really going to cost. Kelly kind of showed to the consumer, but that Pathways report to decarbonize the electric sector by 2040, that's $108 billion that it's going to cost by 2050 for that, and that's not including the price to the consumer. That is a huge price tag, and I think we just need to have a realistic conversation about it. That's what we try to do, but just to put a finer point on that, I think we're getting further and further away from that. Oil and natural gas industry in the state faces a lot of rulemakings on a yearly basis. We are now seeing during these rulemakings that they are focusing on what they're calling lived experiences. So when we go through rulemakings, we really focus, our industry is highly technical, we focus on data, we focus on facts. We have toxicologists and all these subject matter experts up there testifying during these rulemakings, and we're seeing the departments put a lot of weight on these lived experiences. So for example, a woman a couple weeks ago got up and said, I live in Commerce City, and when I do Zumba at my house, I can't breathe very well. But when I do Zumba at my friend's house out in Colorado Springs, I breathe better, and it's because the air quality in my neighborhood is worse. So it's really challenging, and that's tough, right? When we're so highly technical and we focus on data for weight to be given to this, what they're calling lived experiences, and they're making very, very important decisions for our industry that cost a lot of money in the way of compliance, and they're very burdensome, and so that piece has been frustrating, and we're starting to see more and more of that, so just very unreasonable discussions, both at the Capitol and also at our regulatory agencies as well.
You know, one thing Colorado Springs folks are worried about is data centers. And, you know, Colorado is very attractive to some companies who want to put data centers in here, but they require enormous amounts of electricity, right? What do you see as an issue there?
Yeah, so I have just a couple numbers, and I'm sure we've all kind of played around with ChatGPT, and AI is huge, and a lot of folks are very interested. Just a couple of numbers here. So if you query ChatGPT for something, that consumes 4 times more energy than sending an email, and 10 times more energy than if you would have done a Google search for that same thing that you're querying AI for. If you move over to generating an image or generating a video, if you use AI for that, for an image, it's 27 more times the energy for the photo and 245 more times the energy for a video. And so, of course, we've got a lot of youth, a lot of, our younger workforce are really relying on AI and using ChatGPT, and that's the amount of more energy it's taking than our, traditional email and Google searches. And so when we have a conversation about electric costs and our energy future, and data centers are a huge part of that conversation, where is that going to come from? Data centers also are a huge draw on water, which is a huge issue, particularly in Colorado, particularly in the West. So both of those are very concerning.
Tamra, let's jump back to you. You know, you're the Coors Economic Mobility Fellow, right? That's a great title right there. You've tackled many issues related to increasing employment and growing our workforce. Another aspect of the family budget, I think impacting all of us, are the growing costs of childcare. You did a recent report on the challenges of childcare. Can you discuss those challenges and perhaps what are some solutions?
Well, I think anybody who's had young children can either is currently experiencing or can remember the pain of both finding a spot. So in our state, we don't just have a problem with affordability, we have a problem with access to childcare. 51% of the state is in a childcare desert. We looked at the 9 counties along the Front Range, and 8 of them have a shortage of childcare spots. The only one that had an access was Boulder County. The worst, by far, is El Paso County, Colorado Springs area. And so when you look at that and you look at who can't work because they don't have access to childcare, we found that there were 10,200 sidelined moms. So we didn't look at dads, but 10,200 sidelined moms. These are women who would like to go to the workforce but either can't find the childcare or can't afford the childcare. The economics just don't make sense. And so we did a projection that if these moms could go back to work at just median wages, then the impact on the Colorado's GDP is close to $4 billion. So it's one of those things that many of us might think, well, that doesn't really matter to me anymore because we're so relieved that we don't have to deal with childcare any longer. It really is something that really affects us all. It affects us as employers because we lose employees because of the childcare issue, or we can't find employees. And it affects, it's not just about those 10,200 moms going to work, it's about all the other jobs that get created because those moms are working. So in the past 4 or 5 years, there has been 24 bills to help solve this childcare problem. A few of them, not very many, a few of them have been sunsetted because they were related to the pandemic. But there's a whole bunch of different things the state is trying to do to address the issue. And how I think about it is it sort of nibbles around the edges because there's so many different things that affect childcare and affect affordability and accessibility. Childcare is a weird industry because increasing supply does not affect price. It is a very high fixed cost industry. So this legislation, some possible solutions would be to allow, for instance, local governments to create special districts so that they could then get different kinds of funding to support childcare. Another solution is to subsidize workers, prospective workers, to encourage them to get their education to go into childcare. It is one of the lowest paying industries. Many childcare workers actually live in poverty and actually have to have subsidies themselves in order to afford to work. Very ironic. And so all this different legislation is about both increasing access and then increasing supply and potentially increasing number of workers. 16,000 childcare centers closed across the U.S. during the pandemic, and thousands and thousands of workers left the industry. So we've really got to address this in a number of different ways, and it really behooves all of us as business people to get engaged.
Do you think individual businesses should focus more on childcare and offering childcare?
Well, I don't know about offering childcare. I think that that's an interesting challenge for an individual business. However, I think that businesses encouraging the solutions to increase access is a better solution. Perhaps, so one of the possible solutions that we proposed was the Family Affordability Tax Credit that was voted in last year. It's being distributed on an annualized basis. One possible solution is to distribute that on a monthly basis so that you could actually use that for your childcare. Yeah. When that was done during the pandemic, what we found was that the research showed that people used the money, the tax credits for their kids when it was distributed on a monthly basis. When it was distributed annualized, they used it to pay down debt. Yeah. One could argue that the debt was from paying for childcare every month. Right. But, and so that would be one possible solution, is just to support those types of activities.
That makes sense, yeah. Hey, Ross and Lynn, I want to talk about other regulatory challenges you guys are seeing. They're kind of holding back business growth and Colorado's ability to compete. Ross, let's start with you. And what might be the cost of compliance? I know you talk about a lot of this on your show, so I wonder if you just generally might talk about what other things.
All right, so there's a couple things going on. CSI has done some great research in terms of the amount of legislation coming out of the state legislature, and over the past approximately decade, you're seeing about 50%, no, you're seeing about 33% more bills per year, and each bill is about 50% longer than they used to be. So you put that together and you're getting about double the amount of stuff coming out of the legislature. And I want to avoid putting a partisan point on this, but when one party controls the legislature, and especially it's a party that's more interested in regulation than the other one, and then you double the output of that, you're going to start seeing a lot of burdensome stuff. For me, actually, the voters did this based on the legislature because Governor Polis wouldn't sign it, but the paid family and medical leave bill, ballot measure, to me, that's a huge challenge for business formation in the state. And I want to tie it into my bigger thing, and then I'll shut up and Lynn can talk. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this state that are actual costs to businesses for being here. But if I were thinking about setting a business up in Colorado right now, my fear wouldn't as much be, all right, we've got all these fees that are really taxes, but we don't call them that, or we've got all these things. My fear is what's coming next, right? When you hear the mayor of Denver say maybe we should add a 20% surcharge to every restaurant bill, when you know that the family and medical leave thing, they're going to have to raise taxes, the employment tax, to cover that because people are going to start coming for that free money and the free time off. And when you have the particular people who are in charge right now who are so interested in regulating everything, my fear for Colorado is that businesses will say, I just can't take the risk of going there. Even if I could handle all the costs right now, it's too risky. And again, bad analogy, Club, think of the remarkable slowdown in economic activity just in the past few weeks from fear of Trump tariffs, and they're actually going into place today. But the fear of what might come really impacts business decisions, and that's my fear for Colorado.
Is there a state that's doing this better than Colorado?
I think Utah's doing pretty well right now. I think they're in general, red states, I think, are Texas. Texas, Florida. Yeah. Regulatory taxation. again, you know, it's one party has a particular viewpoint that, to go along a little bit with what Tamra said, I think a lot of their mindset is they think they want to do well for people and help people, but a lot of times they ignore the costs. Last quick thing, they seem to be recognizing it a little bit. For example, this bill at the state legislature to allow a reduction in the tipped wage for restaurant workers in municipalities that have raised the wage above the state minimum wage, that thing is being led by Democrats, which is a little bit surprising. And I think they're starting to realize there's some real costs here.
Ross, there's a bill I just noticed to create a Doge-like entity in Colorado to try to cut government and cut regulation. Do you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a great idea. I think it won't happen, but I think I mean, think of the number that Kelly said about how many government workers we have in this state right now. You say 500,000? You said 500,000 out of a total state population of 3.5 million-ish? So 1 out of every 7 people working in this state works for government? You don't have to be somebody who dislikes government to say that can't be good for a state.
Makes sense.
And I'll just
jump in, Lynn.
Right off of that, because just a good example of that. So we, as an industry, need air permits from CDPHE, and over the last few years, they've added 80 FTE. We've had an increase in fees, and our permit timelines have gone up. So right now, if you want a general permit from APCD, it is 703 days you will wait to get a general permit. Again, increase of fees, increase of FTE, permit timelines going down. So I would call that inefficient. So back to just regulatory costs, I think, for our industry. So we've gone through about 40 rulemakings as an industry over the last 5 years, both at the state and local level. Some rulemakings we've done, and then 2 years later, they've opened that same regulation back up, and we've done it all over again to move the goalposts for our industry. We've done some back-of-the-napkin math. I think we're looking at, as just our industry, roughly $700 million annually in additional compliance costs because of all the rulemakings that we've gone through over the last 5 years. So that's a really big number. We had a rulemaking in December alone that will cost some of our members about $300 million to comply with in the next 3 to 5 years, and that's just one rulemaking that we had here in the state. So when we talk about the increased regulation, increased burden, increased costs, it is absolutely outrageous, particularly for our industry, and we're continuing to see legislation. You would think, I don't know, the last Denver Post article, were we at $1.2 billion in a budget deficit? Has it grown since last week? It seems to grow daily. You would think that our policymakers would be focused on trying to balance our budget, not attacking economic drivers in our state, but we continue to see legislation being pushed, particularly directed at our industry that, again, would increase costs, increase regulatory burdens. The Colorado Chamber did a really good report. I think we're the 6th most regulated state in the nation, and about 44% of our regulations are either redundant or unnecessary. So I think we definitely, as a state, need to take a look at that.
But let me ask you, Lynn, we have a new administration in Washington that's very favorable to oil and gas. Do you think that will help lead to more exploration in Colorado? Do you see an uptick in oil and gas production in Colorado because of that?
Unfortunately, no, I don't. I think we're going to stay status quo because of all the rules and regulations that we have and because of our political environment. I don't see that increasing. I think some good news is, we've been able to have fairly stable production in the state, which is pretty incredible, due to our members just being able to be innovative and adapt to all the regulations we have. We're sitting right now at about 9 rigs in the state of Colorado. Just for some context, that's down from 16 last year and about 26, 27 in 2020, 2021. So it's a significant decrease, but our production levels have remained relatively the same. Will that happen into the future? That remains to be seen. But I think because of the nature of our state, I don't think that will have a lot of impact here in Colorado.
All right. Well, listen, let's go to some questions from the audience right now. Cole Anderson, I think you're going to read some questions for us.
Yes, is this on? Here we go. Yes, I am. We have got a question here for Lynn asking about energy, saying, what is the true driver of the green energy push here in Colorado? Is it energy consumption? Is it sustainability? Is it about control? What is it?
Oh, great question. I wish I knew the answer to that. I'll just have to, again, I think it goes back to the discussion we were having earlier just about a lot of misinformation, a lot of unrealistic conversations. I think, a lot of education that needs to happen for consumers. It's kind of sad. A lot of people don't know where their energy comes from. They think they plug things into the wall and it's unicorn magic and things charge and everything's great. They don't realize that, what is supporting the grid. I think that we really need a lot of education in our state, and I think the push is because of uneducated individuals that are hearing this rhetoric that we can, we can decarbonize everything by 2040, we can do this by 2030, we can do that by 2050, and then there's a lot of public push, and we see a lot more public engagement at the Capitol and at our regulatory agencies. And so at the end of the day, I think it's a lot of misinformation, and I think we need to do a better job of providing education.
There's also a question here for Tamra about childcare. Childcare is often a very regulated industry. Is there an opportunity to reduce burdensome regulations in the childcare industry to reduce costs and increase access?
Yeah, one of the things that we proposed in our report was that, for instance, beyond infancy, that you change the ratios, because a lot of the challenge of cost in childcare centers is the fact that that you have to stick with a certain number of children per teacher, and beyond toddlerhood, changing that ratio could be very helpful in terms of costs. Another aspect is related to increasing, instead of, childcare centers themselves are very high cost. And so some of the legislation that has been passed is to increase the support for friends, families, and neighbors kinds of childcare. So one of the things that passed was to allow, in the past, if you lived in a homeowners association, you weren't allowed to have a home childcare center. And so that is no longer the case. Now you can if you're in a homeowners association. And so some of that, these are sort of fringy regulatory things, but they really do impact the number of child care centers that we can have. So that would be a couple of examples.
I think we have time for two more, Cole.
Great. There's a question here about minimum wage for Ross. Does raising the minimum wage just shift the costs rather than making the worker more efficient? Is the minimum wage increases we see here in Denver that's now tied to inflation, is that a reasonable solution for the cost of living?
No, and I don't think there's any real impact on efficiency from raising the minimum wage. I think a lot of folks, and again, I mostly want to attribute good motives to the people who are pushing for an increased minimum wage, but what they seem to forget is that the actual minimum wage is zero, right? And if your minimum wage was $14 an hour and your productivity for that company is, $17 an hour, you still have a job. They raise the minimum wage to 18 and you're out. And the people that hurts most are younger people, minorities who maybe, need a first job and don't have as good an education. And it'll tend to cause businesses to try to hire more experienced employees. You get more efficiency by becoming more experienced, not by getting paid more. So, and of course, as was said before, when you raise the minimum wage, it doesn't just impact the salary that you have to pay to minimum wage workers, right? You got to, let's say, a manager at a restaurant or any other business who's managing minimum wage employees, and they all get a $3 an hour raise. Your manager is going to demand a $4 an hour raise. I need to be paid more than them. I'm managing them, and it pushes up the cost of absolutely everything, and it's quite a punishing thing. But again, I'll say, few things motivate politicians more than citizens noticing the cost of stuff. Look how much Donald Trump and other people are talking about eggs, right? This is a real thing they're really noticing. Democrats are pushing the bill to allow restaurants to lower the minimum wage for workers. Democrats are noticing the cost of electricity going way up, so they are partly leading a move in the state legislature to include nuclear now in the definition of clean energy, right? And these are folks who normally you wouldn't have expected to go down that road, and it's because citizens are saying we're really hurting here, and minimum wage increases only make it worse.
Lynn, do you think nuclear is part of our equation in the future?
Absolutely. Like I said, all of the above. We're going to need all the energy we can get. Can't be a none of the below.
All right, we have time for one more question.
All right, we've got one more energy question here for Lynn. What are the strategies or messaging that you are presenting against Energize Denver?
Against Energize Denver. So I think, our message is really simple. I think perception is always reality, and I think what we've done a better job of in the recent, last 5 or 10 years is really talking about our focus on health, safety, and environment. We've always had a focus on that, and we've always made that a priority, but I think we need to talk about it a little more. I think what we have historically talked about are, economic impacts and costs, which are very real and they're very important, but I think getting our message about our focus on health, safety, and environment is what we really need to be doing and what we are trying to pivot towards now. And I think that will be important, at the Denver level, Colorado, and as a nation as well.
All right, let's have a hand for our panelists. Thank you very much, guys. I think we have some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Vince, Lynn, Ross, Tamra. Another round of applause as they exit the stage. Thank you so much. I would now like to ask the chairman of Common Sense Institute's board, Dave Davia, to close us out. Dave is also the CEO of Colorado Concern, and we're very blessed to have his leadership on our board. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you all. Good morning. Did you like what you heard today? Yeah. So at Common Sense, we produce common sense reports. We produce facts and data to help drive the discussion. We don't produce Republican papers or Democratic papers. That is not who we are. We stay down the fairway, and this work takes an army. The army is you. You're now deputized to go and take this information and share it amongst your friends and your family members. And where do you get more information? You come to our website, you follow us on social media. All those things and all of this platform takes an army. We have a great team of folks, but the important part is if we want to have more of this information and do more, we need your help. And help comes in the way of a financial contribution. We are a 501c3, so anything that you would give us would be tax deductible. We are only limited by money and staff time, but with money comes more staff. And so I'd encourage you, take a look at the resources, take a look at our webpage, become a subscriber, and please consider a contribution to help us continue to do this work. I'll tell you some resources. Our podcaster is right over there, Earl Wright. If you haven't had a chance to consume any of our podcast data, I will tell you it is well done. Earl does a fantastic job. He is a hard host. You better be prepared if you go on his show, but he'll take deep dives on subjects that help you better understand, whether it be energy, whether it be inflation, and Earl does a great job for us, and he's going to have his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame here shortly. But please get involved, stay tuned, and most importantly, consider a contribution. Have a great morning.